تحت كل حجرة وظلت كل شجرة بشوف ذكريات ستي وجدي. فكل ما تسألوني انتي مين، رح أحكي لكم عن قوتهم وكيف أحفادهم صامدين.
Political activity in Palestine, as in most indigenous cultures around the world, is deeply intertwined with everyday social life. Political loyalties are dictated by interpersonal and territorial relationships, and histories, genealogies, and political affiliations are passed down orally through poetry and song. It isn't out of the ordinary, for example, to hear political anthems being sung at weddings or birthday parties. And this relational political order, similar to that of the Anishinaabe described by Leon Betasamosake, emphasizes intimate reciprocal relationships with humans, non-humans, and the land. And in Palestine, music and poetry play an integral role in reflecting and affecting those relationships. As Sinan Antoun puts it, poetry is the archive or diwan of the Arabs, and Palestinian hip-hop, a variation of the poem song, emerges today as an alternative, still contested strand of this cultural archive. This dissertation demonstrates how, since its inception in the late 1990s, Palestinian hip-hop has become the focal point of a broader, alternative, politically engaged musical subculture, where different musical and resistance practices coexist and interact within a complex cultural space. It argues that Palestinian hip-hop artists are at the center of this intersectional subculture that redefines Palestinian resistance and national identity by challenging traditional gender norms, fostering connections with other marginalized communities around the world, and engaging with gaps left in national imaginings of the past. The dissertation takes as its central focus the work of 48 Palestinian rappers, meaning Palestinians who live within the 1948 borders of Israel, and analyzes their most popular releases in comparison to popular work from artists in the West Bank, Gaza, the Arab world, and the global shatat. The term shatat, rooted in the tricontinental shetete, meaning dispersion or scattering, is used throughout instead of diaspora because it more accurately represents the fact of Palestinian exile, forced displacement, and denied right of return, whereas diaspora is generally associated with voluntary emigration.
I'm a hip-hop artist. خلقاني بلندن حياتي بالغرب يعني إنه بالشتات إحنا فلسطينية الشتات يعني مش فلسطينية فلسطين لما واحد بيكتب أغنية أو بيشتغل مشروع إنه بخصه بالقضية أو ببلدنا أو إشي إنه دايماً في خطوة يعني تاني بعدها اللي هي رح توصل النهاية اللي هي يعني الشخصية العربية والشخصية الفلسطينية.
شل أنا شادية منصور ولا حتى هويتي من يوم ما خلقت سيدي والشعب مسؤوليتي لكن اتربيت بين الغرب وبين الشرق.
This comparative analysis reveals a diverse and often contradictory ethos of resistance, shaped by the various socio-political realities artists have inherited and are exposed to.
كل معركة في سلاح معين، ها هون لازم استعمل ميكروفون أفضل من الكلاشين.
By overlaying semiotic interpretations with discursive analysis, the research explores the different conversations these songs initiate and engage with to reveal how young Palestinians within the hip-hop subculture scene build bridges between ethnically divided communities, facilitate intergenerational dialogue, and transmit historical knowledge through their music. Chapter 1 examines the historic relationship between resistance to hegemonic authority and the poem song in Palestine, beginning with the 1799 Nabulsi revolt against Napoleon and leading up to the First Intifada. It is divided into 4 time periods and follows the ebb and flow of major public coalescences and subsequent dispersions of resistance. We focus on key moments such as the Nabulsi coalition against Napoleon's forces in 1799, the Fallahi revolt against the British in 1936, the Nakba in 1948, the Naksa of 1967, and the rise of Fatah and the PLO in the late 60s and early 70s. At the same time, we analyze some of the most influential poems, folklore tunes, and anthems that were performed or composed during these moments, such as the rallying poem of Sheikh Yusuf Jarrar, the work of Ibrahim Tukan of Nablus or Nuh Ibrahim from Haifa, the coded Ala Dalauna folk tune, and songs sung and composed for Palestine by famous musicians around the Arab world. We see how Palestinian national consciousness has been influenced by various geopolitical shifts throughout the 20th century, and how music and poetry have been utilized as a medium for nationalistic propaganda, mobilizing the public, and encouraging engagement in political discussion. Chapter 2 explores how the Oslo interim period helped solidify Israel's apartheid policies in occupied Palestine while facilitating the first stirrings of Palestinian hip-hop inside Israel proper. The Oslo Accords created new anxieties and mechanisms of control for Palestinians to contend with, like zoning laws, more advanced surveillance, and the Israel-dependent Palestinian Authority, while simultaneously providing them with new tools for cultural expression and distribution, expanding translocal and transglobal possibilities for solidarity, resistance, and cultural dialogue. The chapter highlights the role of early Palestinian hip-hop in creating new routes for articulating resistance, challenging traditional gender norms, and fostering connections with other marginalized communities, particularly African Americans. First, the chapter analyzes the initial responses from the 20th century's most prominent Palestinian cultural representatives, Mahmoud Darwish and Edouard Said, who criticized the agreements for their inherent ambiguities and failure to address key issues like Palestinian national rights and the illegal Israeli settlements. The chapter then briefly traces the history of Palestinian and African American solidarity before exploring the first stirrings of Palestinian hip-hop that emerge amidst a collaboration between 48 Palestinian Tamer Nafar and Israeli rapper Kobi Shimoni, known as Subliminal. While this is where Palestinian hip-hop had its beginnings, Nafar and Shimoni's relationship would dissolve in the weeks leading up to the Second Intifada, during which Tamer Nafar's new band Dam would release their ever-famous hit, Who's a Terrorist? Who's a Terrorist, the song that launched Dam's career, was initially downloaded 1 million times when released in 2001 and became an anthem of the Second Intifada. The song is addressed directly to the Israeli state as well as Western colonial powers at large that reduce Palestinians and Arabs in general to terrorists. That same year, another collaboration between Israeli and 48 Palestinian human rights groups would result in the founding of LGBT organization Jerusalem Open House. But again, the effort soon broke down as queer Palestinians felt that JOH, which was committed to its branding as an apolitical organization, reproduced the colonizer-colonized dynamic, precluding Palestinians within the organization from conceptualizing of their queerness in the context of occupation.
In this situation, we started to feel and see how colonizer-colonized basically dynamics started to reproduce itself in terms of what language we can use, right? We couldn't use occupation because this apolitical Jewish Zionist organization could not allow us to use occupation or funding or PR or a lot of things. And in 2005, we decided that the best thing to do is to just split and separate from the Jerusalem Open House. And it wasn't a lesbian breakup in that sense, right? We didn't talk about it before, we didn't talk about it after. It was a one-sided decision. It was a very personal one. Like, we decided that we are going to separate. It was not, even though the motivation was a reactionary one, right? It was transformed through the 2 years process to something like, so how we are going to create this organization, who are we, and how we can establish an LGBT organization in such a context, and what kind of strategies, framing, content, language, terminology we can use so we can be a relevant and group, an integral part of a Palestinian society that's struggling with a lot of social and political issues.
By 2005, they had split apart, and 48 Palestinians founded the Al-Quds Organization for Sexual and Gender Diversity. And in 2013, many well-established hip-hop artists like May Sado and Jawan Safadi from Haifa collaborated on Al-Quds' debut album, غني عن التعريف, or Singing Sexuality.
مش عادية شايفتك كيف شايفتني حسستك كيف حسيتني عجبتني كيف صايرة تحكي عارفة كيف تصغي مش جاي ترضي حد جاي ترضي لك عمل فني وانت بتفتشي ما بتتأسفي عليه وانت طلع لأمك ملكي جاي بالبركة جاي بالحركة صوتي حسكي موازن المعركة.
Chapter 3 engages directly with the content produced by Palestinian hip-hop artists worldwide since the Second Intifada. Using Dam and the 48 Palestinian experience as a central focus, this chapter maps out thematic convergences and divergences in the music, exploring issues of dispossession, agency, gender, sexuality, occupation, and racial inequality. It highlights how contemporary Palestinian hip-hop artists negotiate with inherited pre-Oslo articulations of national identity and resistance, using digital technologies to mediate meaning and create a broad spectrum of liberation practices and discourses. At the same time, the chapter explores how members in and around the alternative Palestinian music scene challenge hegemonic and stereotypic representations of Palestinian resistance while negotiating with their parent Arab culture. The band Dam is composed of brothers Tamir and Suhail Nafar from Lidda, their friend Mahmoud Jreire, and since 2013, Haifa-born May Sado. They are all of Palestinian descent but hold Israeli passports, putting them in the unique position of existing within the state as outsiders, Israeli but not Jewish, and within the Palestinian Arab community as the ones inside Israel, في الداخل, often being perceived as traitors, making their work both sub- and countercultural in Israeli and Palestinian contexts. Rather than conforming to traditional narratives of national liberation or resistance, Dam's work often explores themes such as the cultural expectations of Arab women, honor killing and domestic violence, and the violation of their own rights as the subordinate civilians of a racist state. This negotiation and transmutation of traditional resistance, itself a form of resistance, confronts hegemonic Zionist narratives and challenges the parent culture that views 48 Palestinians as traitors or perceives participants in the alternative music scene as a threat to cultural purity. In the occupied territories, Palestinians have much less freedom of movement and expression. While 48 Palestinians are repressed within the system as part of the system, Palestinians in the West Bank live under ongoing military occupation as the oppressed other, surrounded by checkpoints, soldiers, and armed settlers. Besides the one all-girl rap group to emerge from the West Bank in 2013, the rap trio Ittijah, composed of Dalia Ramadan, Nadine Ade, and Diala Shaheen from Tayshe refugee camp, Hip-hop in the occupied territories is largely dominated by men and aligns with a more traditional, heteromasculine vision of resistance, concerned with representations of defiance and steadfastness in opposition to violent occupation. The song In An, for example, written and performed by rappers Shab Jdid or Abu Athayna and Dabour or Muhammad Karake, both from East Jerusalem, now has 82 million streams on YouTube, making it perhaps the most popular song to come out of the West Bank.
اهدى ما هو كل شي باين في المحنة الله بيشهد مين احنا رجالة ضمن طرطش لك بنضرب حرب الليلة ما بنغلب بدك جبال وعادي بنهد لك مرحب فيك في ولاد القدس مندبر حالنا نحل اللغز رنات على نفحة وكل بخش
The uniforms, images of prisons, the West Bank wall, the men's confident yet confrontational body language, and the lyrics concerned with male might and courage, comparing themselves to lions, bragging about the ways they undermine the occupation, all converge to represent the steadfastness of the sons of Jerusalem and their resistance to fear in a way that both satisfies and builds on traditional heteromasculine ideas of national liberation. In Gaza, young artists face censorship and opposition from Islamist groups like Hamas, who view hip-hop as morally suspect. Despite this, artists like Palestinian rappers and MC Abdul have used their music to articulate their immediate experiences of conflict and trauma. In 2021, MC Abdul, born Abdurrahman Shanti in September 2008, released his first single, Shouting at the Wall, with the San Francisco-based label Empire.
I bomb back with my lyrics and rhymes, living the times trying to break the Palestinian minds. What's hiding in the clouds hanging over my head? My dad risks his life outside to buy bread. The fourth war in my 12th year. At this stage I'm numb, though I haven't feel scared. There's nothing I can do in this case to stay safe. I'm brave, even though this house could be in my grave. I want freedom for the population. 2 million prisoners living in this location, shouting at the wall, but nothing is ever changing. That's life under an occupation. I want freedom for the population.
Shot in one continuous take, the song follows Abdul through Gaza as he raps about the psychological distress of living under constant bombardment, saying that at just 12 years old, he's already experienced 4 wars. Abdul's songs are written almost exclusively in English, his second language, making clear the intention to convey his message to a Western audience and to contribute to a hegemonic Western rather than Arab narrative. In 2022, he and Nafad collaborated on The Beat Never Goes Off, in which they lyrically and visually situate themselves in the midst of a global, intersectional network of struggle against current and inherited systems of oppression.
I'm a little Abu Antar, little Black Panther, على little Hamda, little Biggie, little Pac, عطوقا فدوى, Malcolm in the middle, East, Gaza.
The song's title is an homage to the poem Hamza by poet Fadwa Tuqan, whose name Abdul mentions in his mishmash of identifications, placing the artist in conversation with Tuqan and placing Tuqan herself within a global culture of resistance to hegemonic and imperial power. The clip also brings together the various time-space registers that artists operate from by projecting the image of Abdul in Gaza onto the West Bank wall, overseen by Nafar, himself representing the interior of the 48 border. Outside the historic homeland, hip-hop articulations by Palestinian artists become more divergent, ranging from being personally involved, romantic, futile, and reactionary. Katiba Khamse, who operated from Bulj Brajne, a refugee camp in Lebanon, wrote songs that largely reflected their immediate reality, the limitations and day-to-day sensory experience of living in a refugee camp. British Palestinian Shadia Mansour, dubbed the First Lady of Arabic hip-hop, is most known for her hit single Al-Kafiyya Al-Arabiyya, released in 2013, as a reaction to seeing an Israeli kafiyya being produced in New York. Alternatively, Saint Levant, born Marwan Abdelhamid to a French-Algerian mother and Palestinian-Serbian father during the Second Intifada in Jerusalem, now living in the United States, produces music that offers more romanticized visions of Palestine via the overall romantic personal brand that his work represents and operates under, including the 2048 concept, which he describes as the world that Saint Levant lives in. A world, he says, where Palestine is already free. As a Palestinian living outside of his homeland, I have a lot of privilege, and one of those privileges is the ability to imagine a future for my people, a future where there are no checkpoints, no borders, no patrolling soldiers. It draws heavily from Afrofuturism in the ways it tries to reimagine what kind of world we want for our children. Levant's trilingual rap song Very Few Friends, released in 2022, launched his career when it went viral on social media, and it debuted him as Saint Levant, a sensual, fashionable, feminized Arab man contemplating romantic dispositions, visa complications, and toxic relationship patterns. Since then, Levant's unique blend of languages, styles, and cultural references in his music, coupled with his multicultural high-fashion Loverboy brand, has received a kind of commercial success not yet experienced by any other politically vocal Palestinian hip-hop artist. Been interviewed by magazines like Elle and Harper Bazaar, collaborated with brands like Adidas, and became Dior Beauty's first ever fragrance ambassador in the Middle East in 2023. In his music videos, he's often dressed very casual chic in a loose-fit suit or dress pants and flannel, donning white nails and light jewelry, rapping to an electric beat overlaid with a darbuka drum and oud, performing against the backdrop of a Mediterranean landscape caught in 4K, creating a very particular blend of modernity and tradition in his representation of both himself and of Palestine, challenging Arab ideas of masculinity and gendered behavioral norms, as well as hegemonic representations of Palestinians and Arabs on a global scale.
They used to hate on my nails. How insecure, how sad are you, how immature. ولك مارو بيمسح الأرض فيكم. أنا ومالك مش فاضيلكم. Labels calling I don't need them. ولكم أنا ومالك مش فاضيلكم. In the friend zone وضلك فيها. فيش وقت أروح أصلح فيها. بدها سينت ليفانت وطلب إيدها. فان كلب وشفت أختك فيها. I don't know but I kinda like it when you talk about me on it.
This is quite distant in style and tone from this.
أول بأول شوي شوي عم نتحول لإسرائيلية شلحونا لبنان شلحونا.
Or even this. Yet their shared resistance to occupation, erasure, hegemonic narratives, and stereotypical representation is manifest within the shared subcultural space of Palestinian hip-hop, bringing them together as the fragmented pieces of a new global mosaic of resistance. The dissertation concludes by suggesting that in the future, I might explore other cultural practices, specifically film, used by Palestinian youth to express political identity, and I would potentially draw parallels between Palestinian film and hip-hop, again to explore the mosaic of narratives around Palestinian self-determination based on personal experience and locale. However, since October 7th, I've seen a surge of new hip-hop music and content by not only Palestinian or Arab youth, but young people worldwide, mobilizing on social media against different manifestations of a heteropatriarchal hegemony that Israel appears to be aligned with.
Yeah. The people, they won't leave. What is threatening about divesting in one piece? The problem isn't the protests, it's what they're protesting. It goes against what our country is funding. Block the barricade until Palestine is free. Block the barricade until Palestine is free. When I was 7, I learned a lesson from Cuban Eazy-E. What was it again? Oh yeah, fuck the police. Actors and badges protecting property. in a system that was designed by white supremacy.
I'm interested in exploring more deeply the youth, academic, and legal activism that has been preparing the public for this moment of protest, and to figure out the impact and limitations of youth social media activism in not only challenging, but rewriting hegemonic narratives.
That's taking the spotlight away from Gaza, away from Palestine, and the Palestinian students on campus, and putting it back onto me. I am perfectly safe here, and this has all been a distraction because they don't want us talking about the non-stop massacre of Gaza, of Palestinian civilians being taken out by the IDF.
You have aligned yourself with terrorists. That's the end of it.
I have aligned myself
you
with
have
terrorists.
as well.
I was speaking to you about humanitarian aid to Palestinians, to innocent women, children. Do you know that the average age of the person killed by the Israeli government is 5 years old? And when I tell you that, does that tug at your heartstrings at all?
No, I'm looking for a taxi. Would you please get out of my way?
The only time you can be a neutral ass bitch is when you're watching the National Geographic and you're like, I see why the cheetah needs to eat the gazelle, but I also want the gazelle to also run away. It's a complicated, that's when it's only complicated, bitch.